Welcome to the Planeswalker Project.
What is up, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary friends? Welcome to the Planeswalker Project. Today I want to take a look at an amazing mono-green tribal deck that you might not expect or may not have even heard of. We're not talking about elves, but surprisingly enough, this is a very close relative of the elf tribe, the Druid tribe. When we think of ramp decks, we often immediately think of elves, and they ramp very well. But an often overlooked tribe in green are the Druids, which many elves actually have as a secondary creature type, and which ramp perhaps just as efficiently, if not even better, than their elven brethren. Today, though, we're going to be looking at a Druid tribal deck under the leadership of Seton Krosan Protector. Seton is a very underrated commander for a mono-green deck, usually because options like Azuri or Kamal, Fist of Krosa, which lend better to using all that green mana their decks can churn out to be aggressive. But we're going to be looking at a slightly different route for our build. We're going to contain quite a few elves, but we're going to be using a lot more of a combo-centric strategy for our design. Let's begin by looking at what Seton can do. For just 3 green mana, we get a 2/2 Centaur Druid. You can tap an untapped Druid you control to add 1 green mana to your mana pool. This is a very powerful ability that might not come off as such right off the bat. While the majority of our elf druid creatures like Llanowar elves can already tap for a green mana, because of summoning sickness they cannot do so the turn that they are cast. Seton will get around this ability and allows us to go off earlier by dropping several druids at a time. We will want to drop plenty of druids onto the battlefield, and we have some very potent synergies therein. Let's begin. Perhaps the most brutal of the synergies in this deck is in the form of an elf by the name of the Gilt-Leaf Archdruid. This is the granddaddy of all the cards that we cast in this deck. We get a nice Enchantress style effect whenever we cast a Druid, we get to draw a card, which I love. We also can tap 7 untapped Druids we control to gain control of all lands target player controls. Read that line again. Gain control of all lands that a target player controls. This is one of the rare instances you will see me loving to utilize mass land destruction, if you can call it that, and it's a very potent one. Play this just once, and Seton may gain a target on his forehead, as not only are you taking out any mana an opponent might have gained, but you're going to be bolstering your land count by extraordinary levels. And given that this can be done at instant speed, you can simply wait until your opponent drops their lands for turn, and then tap all your druids to steal them all. And while yes, an opponent can respond by tapping out their lands to utilize their mana, after that they're going to be screwed. Mana screwed! You will also see in some of the other cards in this deck that we will be able to do this on multiple opposing turns, ensuring that when the turn comes back around to us, we're likely going to be the only ones with lands in play. I want to take a moment to clarify a ruling that might come into play here. Previously, if for some reason you came under the possession of a land during a game that produces colored mana outside of the color identity of your commander, it would be colorless mana that land produces. But around the time Battle for Zendikar came out, I believe, the ruling shifted so that now, lands that are under your control that for some reason tap for colored mana outside of your commander's color identity, they can tap for that color regularly. You just can't include them in your deck building. So upon gaining control of your opponent's lands through the Archdruid, these lands will still tap as they normally would for the mana they produce. Now, don't fret my young druid friends, we do have many other ramp spells in our deck. Our assortment of mana dorks all happen to be druids as well, so those Finehorn elves and the Elvish mystics are all great 1-drops. Elvish Archdruid and Priest of Titania are explosively good, as not only can they tap for the 1 mana the minute they get cast while Seton is out, they can tap for a glob of mana on the next turn. Heritage Druid is another niche fallback for utilizing most of our elves should Seton be hated off the board. Karametra's Acolyte will give us a ton of mana the more board presence we have. That devotion is pretty potent. Krosan Wayfarer is a personal favorite of mine, being able to tap for a green mana and then being able to sacrifice itself to give you an extra land drop. This is a rather unique mana ramp ability that I really like in this deck. Somberwald Sage is one of my favorite mana ramp creatures, as it's literally a Black Lotus on a stick for creatures. So you can tap her to drop 3 of your mana dorks, tap them for 3 more mana, and it just snowballs from there. There's just so much mana ramp in this deck, it's absurd. In fact, there's so much mana ramp from just the creature base, we have only a little need for our lands after a few turns, even given that we will be stealing opponents' lands. Because of this, we do only run 2 main cards that will give us land ramp: Harvest Season and Exploration. Exploration is really nice because dropping at turn 1 gives you a potential for a turn 2 Seton who can also tap himself for mana. And since we will quickly grow beyond the need for our lands, Winter Orb might be useful here. It might hinder us should we be sitting at 20 or 30 stolen lands, but just in case we need to slow down our opponents a little further, it's nice to include. The next section I want to explore is the methods of card draw. We will want to be able to draw into more Druids to cast more Druids to build up our Druid Coven, and these cards will do just that. We run a few big green creatures who will give us card draw, such as Primordial Sage, Regal Force, and Soul of the Harvest, which will be also good sinks for all that excess mana. Kindred Summons will literally double the amount of Druids on the battlefield, to the point I almost consider this a win con on its own. Vanquisher's Banner gives us a card draw for each time we cast a Druid, and it gives a nice Anthem ability. Sylvan Library is almost a staple in any deck running green, giving us up to 2 extra cards per turn. And of course, Genesis Wave is Genesis Wave. With all that mana we can churn out, we can easily put our whole library into play. And lastly, Shamanic Revelation can double as a life gain spell should we have given a few buffs through Kamal or Azuri. Now, the main strategy of this deck is to ramp out and eventually overrun opponents with our Druids, utilizing the aforementioned overrun effects that we have on several of our creatures. But there are times where we will want to shoot for more specific strategic moves, such as the Gilt Leaf Landsteal, and so we will want to be able to tutor specifically for cards. For that, we run a number of tutor spells: Chord of Calling, Worldly Tutor, Birthing Pod, Evolutionary Rites, Eldritch Evolution, and the Green Sun Zenith. Natural Order, and then Tooth and Nail will ensure that we will get the cards we want when we want them. What do we do to win with this deck? We've covered plenty of ramp and tutor effects, but what does this deck do? We have a couple of win conditions to mention. Many of these will utilize the dumb amounts of mana we can produce, so keep that in mind. Perhaps the most terrifying to face down is the Helix Pinnacle, which can use any extra mana at the end step to work our way towards getting 100 tokens on it, at which point we will win the game then and there. It also has Shroud, which means opponents will not be touching this outside of a mass enchantment wipe. Door of Destinies and Beastmaster Ascension can make our Druids huge should we decide to go out swinging. We do run Crater Book Behemoth, but then again, what creature-based deck in green doesn't run it? And a card that I'm truly growing to love in creature-heavy decks, Throne of the God Pharaoh, can start singeing opponents for our tapped-out creatures. Lastly, we do have a few ways to untap our cards, so those nasty little strategies can go off multiple times without leaving us tapped out. Seedborn Muse is the main character in this story, untapping everything we control during each upkeep, both ours and our opponents'. This means if we have those 7 Druids handy and ready for Gilt Leaf Archdruid, we can take every player's land during each of their upkeep before they can do anything each turn. This means that we can use our mana abilities each turn if we have Helix Pinnacle out. Quest of Renewal will take a little bit of work to reach those 4 quest counters, but once it does, we can untap all of our creatures during each other player's turn as well. Paradox Engine untaps our non-land permanents each time we cast a spell, meaning if we are relying on Seton and our other Druids tapping for mana, our spells will not even cost us anything. Since we're in mono green, our land base doesn't really need anything super fancy. I choose to run Gaia's Cradle in here because it's just more mana for the plucking. Cavern of Souls, while not super necessary given the sheer speed of the deck and the ability to shut off opponents' games, it really helps protect Seton and our other Druids from the pesky counter magic. Maze of Ith will be helpful in situations where the table decides to swing at you, so any game after game 1. And not that this deck needs any more mana production, but Nykthos is great to produce an extra ton of mana. Path of Ancestry is useful to give some scry ability, though the card draw in this deck greatly makes up for it in quantity. Wirewood Lodge is a good tech for the amount of elves we carry, letting us reuse Priest of Titania or Elvish Arc Druid. And lastly, Yavimaya Hollow is a great protection against our key cards being killed off. And that's going to wrap up our look at Seton Krosan Protector. I really enjoy this deck build because of just how fast it ramps, and how it almost feels like a control deck, using the tutors to really get that engine rolling. It's fun to steal lands away from opponents, or at least that's the thing people say they enjoy the least about facing it. The lands are still going to be used, we're just going to appreciate them on my side of the field better, that's all. What do you think of this deck? Are there some interesting tech you would recommend to someone wanting to build Seton? Which commanders should we look at next? Let us know in the comments section below. Remember to like this video and share it with your commander friends. Subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss an upload, and check out our Patreon if you'd like to help us improve the content quality even further. And as always, I'll catch you all next upkeep.